let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking the incredibly intense emotional landscape and just vivid poetic imagery of a truly ancient text, Psalm 35. If you've ever felt the absolute sting of a false accusation or that deep, awful ache when a trusted friend suddenly turns into an enemy, well, you're going to find a lot that resonates in what we're looking at today. Because this isn't just some dusty old poem, right? It's a raw, visceral blueprint of human suffering and a desperate plea for things to finally be made right.
I mean, really think about this for a second. How do you respond when the people you mourn for suddenly turn against you? That profound, painful question sits right at the very heart of the text. It grounds all this ancient poetry in a psychological reality that is just universally relatable. It frames literally everything we're about to explore. We're going to see exactly how the author, David, navigates this exact scenario, moving through some very distinct phases of emotional processing. We're talking everything from begging for a warrior's defense, to spotting the hidden traps set for him, and finally demanding a definitive courtroom verdict.
All right, let's get into Section 1, Call to the Divine Warrior.
So we kick off this thematic journey with a cinematic, deeply aggressive call for intervention. And I mean aggressive. The text doesn't ease you into its emotional plea at all. It basically kicks the door down right from verse 1. Notice how verses 2 and 3 use these heavy life-or-death military metaphors to really emphasize the sheer intensity of David's situation. We see a call to take hold of shield and buckler, to draw the spear and javelin. Like, these aren't abstract, philosophical ideas we're dealing with here. This is ancient close combat weaponry. By asking the divine to arm itself with a shield for defense and a javelin for offense, the author is screaming that he's in a situation of immediate life-threatening danger.
And this brilliantly illustrates the dramatic pacing of the text. In verse 5, the imagery completely shifts to chaff before the wind. Now, if you're not familiar, chaff is just the useless husk of grain. It's totally weightless and gets easily blown away by even a slight breeze. So the author is visualizing a complete and total rout. It highlights this really deep desire for his oppressors to be utterly scattered by the angel of the Lord.
Moving right along to Section 2, Nets, Pits, and Traps. Now, the scene shifts entirely from battlefield weaponry to these stealthy, quiet metaphors of hunting. Notice how verse 7 repeatedly uses the phrase, without cause, to underscore the sheer injustice of the traps being set here. Quote, "For without cause they hid their net for me, without cause they dug a pit for my life." That repetition is absolutely crucial. It emphasizes that David didn't provoke this at all. This isn't a fair fight out on an open battlefield. This is an ambush. The enemy is acting like hunters trying to snare completely unsuspecting prey.
So, the real kicker here is the ancient concept of poetic justice, where the aggressor is ultimately caught in the exact pit they dug. Coming straight from verse 8, David prays for destruction to hit his enemy totally unawares. He's asking that the very net the enemy hid would wrap them up instead. It's this beautifully structured cycle of retribution. He basically wants the pure malice they intended for him to become the exact mechanism of their own downfall.
Which brings us to Section 3, the anatomy of betrayal.
Okay, here we strip away all those military and hunting metaphors to examine the deep psychological core of the text. And it is a devastating, evil-for-good narrative. Just look at this sheer asymmetry on display. When these people were sick, David wore sackcloth. He fasted. He bowed his head in genuine mourning, grieving for them like it was his own brother or mother. But the second David stumbled, they rejoiced. They gathered against him, tearing at him without ceasing, literally gnashing their teeth. It just perfectly, painfully illustrates the completely one-sided nature of this relationship. Actually, here's a really fascinating little detail. We have to remember we're analyzing a complex ancient manuscript that still holds a few translation mysteries for modern scholars. In verse 16, the text compares these enemies to profane mockers at a feast. But if you check footnote F from the source material, you'll see that the exact meaning of that specific Hebrew phrase is actually kind of uncertain. Yet, even with these slight linguistic ambiguities across thousands of years, man, the intense hostility and the biting mockery in that imagery, that comes through loud and clear. And that brings us to verse 17. How long, O Lord, will you look on? This single line is really the emotional pivot of the entire text. We transition from just describing all this deep suffering to a desperate, urgent plea for rescue from the lions. David feels like he's just being watched from afar while he's actively being torn apart.
He begs for his precious life to be rescued. We all know that universal feeling, right? Waiting for help that feels painfully, agonizingly delayed.
And finally, Section 4, the final verdict. So the text resolves by moving into the metaphorical courtroom of ancient justice. The author realizes he needs way more than just a physical rescue at this point. He needs a public, formal vindication. Notice how verse 23 uses very distinct legal terminology, totally transforming his plea into a formal request for a righteous verdict against these malicious witnesses. Awake and rouse yourself, for my vindication, for my cause. He's appealing to the divine as the ultimate judge to vindicate me, according to your righteousness. David is asking for the official record to be set straight so his enemies can't sit back and say, "Aha, our heart's desire," or "We have swallowed him up." He wants their deceit completely exposed for all to see.
The text concludes its whole emotional arc by stating that a fair judgment won't just bring personal relief, but it will actually cause a whole community to shout for joy and praise. The focus completely shifts away from the enemies and points directly toward those who delight in my righteousness. Justice in this ancient context isn't just about punishing the wrongdoer, it actually restores the entire social and spiritual order. And that prompts David to promise that his tongue will tell of this righteousness all day long. As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to consider how these themes of betrayal, vindication, and that universal desire for a righteous outcome just continue to resonate in our human experience today. Thousands of years later, why does this ancient cry for justice still feel so familiar to us? Psalm 35 acts almost like a mirror, reflecting our own deepest cries for fairness when we've been wronged by the very people we trusted most. So what do you do when the net is hidden for you? Well, perhaps, just like the author of this remarkable text, you look past the battlefield entirely, and you appeal to a higher court.